exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swarts.
My God, Tim, what's gotten into you? Why are you making those weird noises and what's with those faces?
I'm concentrating on becoming a master of shape-shifting. I have learned a technique from Maria de Andia, who is a certified shaman. She has taught me the way.
Wow, she must have taught you right, because your facial features are getting even more weird than they normally are, and you're starting to look like some kind of vicious wolf, and I'm just getting scared. So I'm gonna have to consult with our guest tonight to see what's going on, because I'm just afraid that you may not be able to turn back into a human if you shapeshift all the way.
Hell, Tim, I didn't mean to scare anybody. I was trying to turn into a collie so someone would pet me. That's all I was doing.
Okay. Well, just stop for a minute at least till we get back to the KCOR studios.
I'll do my best.
All right. Well, you're looking better now.
Well, I always try to look my best, especially when I'm on the air, even if it is just the audio.
Well, go ahead, Tim.
Well, no, I was just going to ask the usual buzz question. How you doing out there in Jasper, Indiana?
Well, I'm doing okay, but this has been a kind of a bad week because we've lost a couple of our friends. I mean,
yes,
Rosemary Ellen Guiley passed away.
Oh my goodness! Yep. She'd written. I think the last I looked up, something like 52 books, and of course, she had been on our program several times, and she used to come to the New York Fortean Society meetings over here, right next door to where I am. Of course, it's a vacant lot now, but it wasn't then. And then she would join John Keel and Peter and myself over at Miss Kay's for a meatball sandwich. And we'll sadly miss her because she was I think she's with the Angels now because she'd probably written more books on angels than anything else. We also another kind of associate of ours, one of our authors, Tracy Twyman. Passed away under what we think might be mysterious circumstances, but we still don't quite have the information on that yet. Although we're checking into it. She was the author of a book that we published, a very controversial one, Mind-Controlled Sex Slaves of the CIA, which we put out a couple of years ago, and it's still doing very well. As they say in the publishing business, it has legs. And we'll be working on something else. We want to put together a retrospect on her career in life because she was into a lot of esoteric subjects, probably, Tim, as you know. And secret societies, and she was actually did some correspondence with Alan Greenfield. She was producing Ground Zero the night that he brought down the Archangel Meteoron. Remember, right. And the roof of the studio flew off there. Apparently, as the spirit came through. And then the third passing is an actor. I don't think either one of us knew him, but Roger Hauer was one of the stars of Blade Runner, which is based, of course, upon Philip K. One of Philip K. Dick's books. And there is a synchronicity involving his death. The movie, Blade Runner, took place in the future. Of course, I don't know how many years ago it was actually released, but it took place in the year 2019, and he passed away in 2019, just a few days ago. And he's a very well established actor, very polished and professional, and got great reviews for his role in Blade Runner. So this is not a, like you say, not a great week, but the show must go on, as they said in the used to say the circus. I think it was right. I mean, that's
Yeah.
okay. And I don't think we have a circus going here, but maybe we do from time to time. Anyway, introduce our guest for this evening, because we do have a very interesting show coming up.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Well, I'm really happy that tonight we have JOHN KACHUBA with us. Now, John is the award-winning author of 12 books and numerous articles, short stories, and poems. John holds advanced degrees in creative writing and teaches that subject through Ohio University and the Gotham Writers Workshop. He's a member of the Historical Novel Society and the Horror Writers Association. Now, John frequently speaks on paranormal and metaphysical topics and is a regular speaker at universities, libraries, paranormal conferences, and on podcast, radio, and television. Now, on top of everything else, John is the author of such books as Ghosthunting Ohio, On the Road Again, the novel Dark Entry, and the book we're going to be talking about tonight, Shapeshifters, A History. So, John, thanks very much for being with us tonight on Exploring the Bizarre.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm just getting back into my human form here, John.
Wipe the saliva off of you, Tim.
Well, okay, and I'll get my teeth out of your arm too. Not so fast though, just so you feel the burn, right? Hey, okay, John. So now, when I think of shapeshifters, I think of Skinwalker Ranch. I would believe if any particular incident has brought the topic to the public's attention, it would be the incidents that have taken place there over the last several decades or so. But there may be some listeners to our show who are not hep on what a skinwalker might be. So shapeshifter, skinwalker. So why don't you give us a little bit of a background on what they might be, and how the legend really got started?
Sure, no problem. The simplest definition of a shapeshifter is simply a person that is capable of transforming, actually physically transforming themselves into any kind of animal, possibly another person, or even sometimes an inanimate object. And in the book Shapeshifters, A History, what I wanted to do was I wanted to trace the idea of the shapeshifter character through different cultures. I wanted to see how universal it was. I also wanted to see how long it's been with us. So in researching this book, I found that, sure enough, cultures all around the world, on every continent, have some type of shapeshifter character in their mythology, in their perhaps religious beliefs, or actually even in life, having actual encounters with shapeshifters. And I found that it goes back as far back as like the Neolithic era. There are wall paintings in some caves in France that show what are typically people transforming into animals. And these were shamans who were doing sort of hunter magic, they called it, going into rituals and going into trances with hunters to allow them to go out and be successful on the hunt. But to do that, they had to feel they were one with the animal, that they in fact were the animal. So it's very interesting. I mean, there were a million rabbit holes that I went down on this book as I was exploring it. It was hard to kind of wrangle it into something that made sense. There was so much material.
Well, why did you decide to do a book on this particular topic?
Well, it probably stemmed out of the work that I had been doing in the past. Several of my books in the past, as you mentioned, have been about ghosts, particularly ghosts and hauntings around the United States and some international. And I've been on a lot of radio programs like yours and different kinds of shows. And when we start talking about paranormal experiences, we start off with ghosts, but then it always drifts. And people always talk about hearing about stories about werewolves or vampires, or as you mentioned, skinwalkers, or any of these, wide variety of shapeshifters. And so I started thinking, boy, this is really a big thing. There's a lot of people talking about this. Why? So in doing the research, I uncovered just, how popular it was. And I thought, this is great. This is a topic for a book. So it developed from, previous work, really.
Now, you say that this goes back in history. Now, I know that the Native Americans have many legends about the shapeshifters and all. Anything in the Bible that refers to the topic?
Yeah, actually, one of the earliest incidents or sort of reportings of a werewolf goes back to the Old Testament, to the book of Daniel. And I'm just going to paraphrase it. I don't read the exact quote here. But the idea was that there was a king, Nebuchadnezzar, who apparently was testing God. And I forgot exactly what that was about. But anyway, God was displeased with him and so turned him into a beast. And the way it's described in the Bible is that it went about on all fours. It ran around in the grass. It was eating grass. It had hair. It sprouted hair everywhere. It had talons or claws, depending on how the Bible's interpreted. So people say this is the first werewolf that we've seen sort of recorded. And the Bible mentions other ones too. I mean, there's even some theologians now that have a theory in the New Testament that Jesus himself could have been a shapeshifter. And this I found very interesting. I had never heard this before. But there was a particular theologian at a university in the Netherlands who found a Coptic text, I don't know how old, thousands of years old, in the Morgan Library in New York. And as he started interpreting it, he interpreted it to mean describing Jesus as ruddy, sort of a reddish color, as white, as old, as young, all these different descriptions of him. And the bottom line is something like, paraphrase it again, is that he appeared to many in different ways. So you wonder, well, what is that about? And there's even some more incidents in the New Testament, again, referring to Jesus as a possible shapeshifter.
Well, that's fascinating. Now, how about down through history? Have there been any famous individuals who have come across shapeshifters or talked about them?
I don't know about famous individuals necessarily, but there are certainly all kinds of recordings up into present time about incidents with shapeshifters, especially with werewolves. It seems to be a pretty common, common type. I'm not sure about any famous personalities. So, do you have somebody in mind?
Well, no. I was thinking of the Bell Witch, but I don't know whether there was a. Well, wasn't there something to do with a dog or an animal or something that chased the president or?
Well, not the president, but the allegedly the children who lived in the household said that they would occasionally see odd-looking animals. That later the voice of the Bell Witch would claim that was her. That she could appear in all kinds of different shapes. But what about Saint Germain? Didn't Saint Germain appear at various times throughout history as a different person?
I don't know.
Yeah, well, he has appeared throughout history. Maybe he's just changed his cap and gown or something. I'm not sure whether he's shapeshifting or not, but that's certainly a strong possibility. Now, have you talked to any Native Americans about this topic?
Yeah, and it's a little bit difficult to get a lot of information from them, especially if you're talking like to the Dene people, the Navajo people, the Southwest, because they have this strong belief in skinwalkers, which are not exactly nice people. They're brujo, they're witches, and they transform, according to Navajo belief, into basically killing machines. I mean, they're sought for vengeance and that kind of thing. So if you're looking for a skinwalker, you're looking for him to do some harm to somebody, and he will. But so the people are reluctant to talk about that because the belief is very, it's very deeply embedded in their lore, and they feel that even by sort of talking about it, mentioning it, that they could bring that shapeshifter into their own life, and that would not be a pleasant experience for them. So I got a lot of recorded accounts, but it was difficult to get a lot of people to actually speak about it.
Now, how about the activity at the Skinwalker Ranch? Have you talked to anybody who's been involved in investigating that?
I haven't spoken to any of the investigators there, but you're right. There's a lot of incidents about that, and I sort of didn't even cover that so much because I already thought that had been pretty much out there, and I was trying to be more broad spectrum and look at cultures where we're looking at something a little bit different than the typical werewolf thing and vampire thing.
Well, now we're being historical for a minute here. What are some of the historical incidences in the U.S.? I mean, can we point to any particular incidences of shapeshifters outside of Skinwalker Ranch?
Yeah, I mean, back in New England in the late 18th century and into the 19th century even, there was a whole panic, I guess you can call it, a vampire panic. And what was happening was people in New England were dying, and they were dying in a way that they were sort of wasting away. They were becoming emaciated, pale, drawn, and their death was prolonged. It took months, sometimes years. And people were thinking, well, this could only be the work of vampires, because when a vampire preys on you, it's long term, and he gradually takes your energy, your lifeblood, and eventually you die or become a vampire like him. So they were immediately, all throughout New England while this was going on, people started going into cemeteries, and they started opening graves and desecrating corpses that they believed were vampire corpses. And there's a famous case out of Exeter, Rhode Island, of Mercy Brown, and I think probably a lot of your listeners will probably know that story. But the short of it is that members of her family, this was around 1890, 1892, somewhere around there, members of her family, her mother, her sisters, and mothers, had died from this wasting away disease. And she was 19. She survived by about 10 years, her mother and her sister's death. And then she died. She was only 19 when she died. Her brother became sick as well. And so when the people in the town started thinking about this family and how they all died, they thought, wow, this wasting away, she's only a 19-year-old girl. This must be the work of a vampire. So to save the brother, they opened Mercy's grave, they cut out her heart from her corpse, and they burned it. And they took the ashes, they mixed it into a sort of broth, and they fed that to the sick brother, thinking this is going to cure you. It's like the hair of the dog, in a sense.
Like, literally right. In this case, or the bat. I said bat, I guess.
The hair of the bat, right? We'll give you this vampire potion, and it will save your life. Well, it didn't save his life. He did die. But it turns out that this wasting away disease, we know it. There was even a term for it then. It was consumption. We know it as tuberculosis. But there was this panic. People were dying of tuberculosis, and all the time they're thinking there's this vampire outbreak. So it was, it was pretty major. It was reported in all the newspapers. In fact, when Mercy Brown's grave was opened, there was a reporter from the Providence Journal, the major newspaper in Rhode Island, who was right there at the time and recorded everything, how they cut out the heart and all this. And, it's you can get a copy of the old Providence Journal from 1892 and read a firsthand account of this. So that kind of terror was very common with both werewolves and vampires in Europe, and but it seems more in Europe than anywhere else. But we had our own little share here.
Well, now, okay, we talked about turning into a bat, and I guess you could turn into a wolf or a coyote or something like that. Does anybody turn into anything else? I mean, what are some of the things that you might want to turn into?
Well, I don't know what you might want to turn into, but yeah, almost any kind of animal. I mean, there are were bears, werewolves, of course, were otters. I mean, if you name an animal, there's a were animal for it. And when I looked in some of the cultures, like in Africa, for instance, a lot of the shamans there would transform, and they would transform obviously into what animals were in their environment. So they're transforming into leopards, to lions, to different kinds of gazelles. I mean, you name it. There could be a were-turtle, probably. I mean, you want it.
I was going to ask you that, but I didn't want to sound like an idiot.
No, I mean, anything is game. And we mentioned a little bit earlier, the Bell Witch was brought up, and witches were, of course, always associated with shapeshifting. That was part of their thing, right? And they could change into anything. And again, even an inanimate object. They didn't have to be, a breathing animal person.
We have one of our authors, Maria DeAndrea, has just written a book, came out a couple of weeks ago, in fact, on familiars. And she had, like you say, totems, I believe she called them. And it doesn't just have to be a dog or a cat or a bird. It could be something that you're closely akin to. So yes, right. Indeed. Now, if I want to shapeshift tonight, for some reason, is there a potion that I can take, or what do I do in order to change my shape?
Well, the easiest thing would be to put a mask and a costume on, and just.
I was going to say outside of cross dressing. Yeah, go.
Right, but and I joke about that. Yet at the same time, if you think about what the shapeshifter character is all about, there is this desire that we all have, I think, to sometimes look outside our nature, look outside what we are, and to wish to be something else. We're dual nature people. We have good, we have evil, we have light sides, we have dark sides. Yeah. And if you think of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, a famous example, this great noble doctor who said, I want to take a walk on the wild side. And he developed a potion. I don't know if it's still around. Maybe we can find it for you. But he developed this potion, right? And he becomes Mr. Hyde, a completely miserable.
Some of the women that I have gone out with have called me a dog, but I don't know if that's referring to my shape-shifting ability or not.
Well.
Okay.
Well, it used to be, Tim, that you could get the the pelt of a wolf and make a belt out of it, and smear yourself, I think, with nightshade or something like that, and that was supposed to turn into a wolf.
Right. There's a lot of examples.
I'll have to try that over the weekend, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of examples in my book of that, going back to the Icelandic days and the old warriors who would do that. Wear pelts, bear hides, wolf hides, and also take some hallucinogenics as well from the environment, which helped too.
I would think so. Yeah.
All right. Well, we are coming up to the our bottom of the hour break, Tim. So why don't we go ahead and take that, and when we come back, we will continue our conversation with John about shapeshifters.
Now back to exploring the Bizare with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal, your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swarts.
Tim, I don't think I like this shape-shifting stuff. Now I've got fleas and I got the mange.
Have to put a flea collar on you.
Yeah, there's got to be something to be said for keeping more human, I suppose, in the future. But I gave it a shot. Anyway, Tim, you carry on here with
I wanted
our beastly show. Yes,
I wanted to bring up, Tim, that I live here in southern Indiana, and this area was originally populated by the French as far back as the 1500s. So there's this rich tradition of the Rougarou that still kind of pervades some of the descendants of these French settlers. And you were asking about different animals. There's actually a story of a gentleman who he missed mass for 5 days in a row, and somehow I'm not quite sure how this happened. He was turned into a were cow. So there's an interesting animal for you. It's not just wolves or bats. The person can be turned into a cow as well. So, John, I wanted to ask you now, with the whole shape-shifting idea. I mean, it's been with us since prehistory, and probably further back than that. Would you think that the idea of the shapeshifter is almost an archetype? I mean, it's so pervasive. I mean, even today. Is this something that's really just ingrained, upon that, maybe even that reptilian part of our mind?
I think there is a lot of what would I say? Sort of a lot of psychology involved in here that really sets this up as going back a long, long way. And there are archetypes that are here as well. Jung wrote about the animus and the anima. The female side in every male, the male side in every female, and that right there is shape-shifting. But I think there's something even more elemental in that, and I touched on that a little bit before when I talked about Jekyll and Hyde, and that's that we have a dual nature. We know that we're capable of good, we're capable of bad, and the thing is, the only thing that keeps us sort of on the straight and narrow and keeps us in check are bonds that we construct ourselves. So they're religious bonds, they're legal bonds, they're moral bonds. But this is what holds us in check. But if you could shake off all that, if you could just get rid of everything like that, so you have no restrictions on you or your behavior or anything that you want to do, would you take that freedom and how would you use it? And I think the shapeshifter character gives us that sort of chance to maybe virtually think about what it would be like to sort of wish fulfillment. Like, if we could get rid of that, how awesome would that be? Mm-hmm. So I think there's something in our nature that says, it'd be great if we can do this, but we control it through societal means. So you have that going on. And then there's just this whole psychological thing about, there's some psychological delusions too about what shapeshifters are. I mentioned, I don't know if we actually talked about it or not, but lycanthropy, for instance, is an actual psychological delusion where somebody believes that they've transformed into a wolf. And in my book, I have some case histories of this. And you hear about, for instance, there was a guy who was a 20-year-old guy, and this was reported in 2000 in a journal, 2014, a psychiatric journal by a psychiatrist. This was his patient. And he talked about how this guy would go around on all fours. He'd howl, he'd bark, he'd snap at you. And yet he wasn't even aware of these activities. After some treatment, he began to understand his behavior a little bit. And the doctor started talking to him and said, well, what's this about? And he said, well, I'm a werewolf. I transform into a werewolf at times and I can't control it. Well, nobody saw any transformation, but in his mind it was there, and he acted out as a werewolf. So whether he had the hair or not, didn't really matter.
So he was an internal shapeshifter.
Right. And I make that distinction in my book between external and internal shapeshifters. The external ones being the ones that you can actually see. That transformation, the famous Lon Chaney Jr. and American Werewolf in London, those kinds of things where you see the hair grow and the physical transformation, and you hear bones cracking, and suddenly you have something different than a human being. But then there's the internal shapeshifter. And those are the ones that, nothing happens on the outside, but inside they have changed. And for all practical purposes, they're not human anymore. They have become something else. I was on a radio program not too long ago, and somebody said, well, what about somebody like Ted Bundy? Is that a shapeshifter? I thought, wow, I hadn't really thought about that. but everybody remembers Ted Bundy as this, serial killer. But on the outside, he was this clean-cut, sort of preppy-looking guy, very friendly, very outgoing. Everybody loved Ted. And he turned out to be this horrible, horrible serial killer. So what was going on inside him? Had he shifted in a way to something, some kind of a psychopath? Man, that's really sort of extending the definition of shapeshifter, but that's what this book does. It looks at a whole range of what a shapeshifter could be.
Mm-hmm. Well, this also makes me think of pop culture and how pop culture has really embraced the whole idea of the shapeshifter. I mean, there's a lot of examples that I think that people wouldn't even think about as being shapeshifters, but there they are. I mean, you look at some of these some cartoons that are out now, or movies. I mean, you have the Transformers, not necessarily human right. Shapeshifters, but you have robots that can change into cars and back to robots again.
Right, exactly. And those Transformer movies have been very popular. The toys have been popular for years. And I do write about the Transformers in my book, and I do write about popular culture and how, to your point, the shapeshifters have become almost invisible in a sense. We don't really think of them as shapeshifters. But then when somebody points it out, you go, oh, yeah. You mentioned cartoons. I've got 11 grandchildren. And that's my first. Yeah, okay. Got 11 grandchildren, and 2 are little. They're both girls, and they're young. And one of them is watching a cartoon called Vampirina, right? And it's a cute little cartoon. It's about this little vampire girl and her vampire family, and they move from Transylvania to Pennsylvania. Okay, but Vampirina
makes sense.
Yes, right.
Very, very clever, very clever. They got confused while looking at a map, no doubt. Yeah.
But they got the Ilvania part there, so they're right. Yeah. But Vampirina is this little vampire girl, and she transforms to things all the time. And my little granddaughter is watching it, and she doesn't think, "Oh, Dad, Grandpa, that's a shapeshifter." She just says, "Oh, look what Vampirina's doing." And the other one is watching a cartoon again called Morphle, spelled Morphl. And Morphle is a red blob with feet. And apparently it's like they call it a magic pet. Well, Morphle, you can get where this is going from morphology and, morphogenesis. You can see the name there. Changes anytime to, whatever he wants to. He can be a dinosaur. He can be a fire hydrant. And the kids love it. But they're watching shapeshifters. So it's there. It's everywhere.
Not realizing how far back this meme actually goes. That's right. That's just so interesting. Well, now I know that you have been involved over the years with ghost hunting as well. Your first book was the Ghosthunting Ohio. What about have you looked into some of these stories where haunted locations? It appears that whatever is haunting, whether it be, a ghost, spirit of the dead, whatever have, sometimes appears in different forms. And in fact, you have mediums who go and check out these places, and they allege that they've communicated with the spirit. The spirit will say that it has the ability to appear as various different forms, either, say like an old man or a woman or what have you.
Well, it's interesting. I don't know that I've come across that personally, but certainly there are locations that I've been in where we'll go in one time, maybe with a medium or something on the team, who will say, "Oh, there's a woman here. She's a young woman and she's standing in the corner," or something. But then maybe some other group might go in later on and see something else. And I've had some locations like that where there's been sort of several different, I'll call them entities for lack of a better word at this point, right, but several different ones. And so to your point, I wonder, are we really looking at 7 different entities, or is it possible, as you say, that maybe one of them or 2 of them or whatever have the ability to change their shape? Like I said, I haven't come across that in personal experience. But, if you look at some of the ghost lore from around the world, if you look at Japan, for instance, and look at Japanese ghosts, They have, first of all, it's fascinating. They have thousands of different kinds of Japanese ghosts, but so many of them are shapeshifters. And a lot of times they'll actually change into the form of a human, and a human known to the living. So like an imposter in a sense. That's happening in Japanese lore and Japanese ghost stories. So what you're talking about is possible, I think.
Well, and you also have, say, like especially the English and Irish lore of the fairies. The fairies would use glamour to appear as different forms, and like you said, sometimes as people that are familiar to the witness.
Right. I mean, I have two different chapters in my book that are called Fae Fairy Folk,
Mm-hmm.
and they are about some of these sort of beings that we wouldn't normally consider shapeshifters. They wouldn't be the normal stereotypical werewolf vampire. Talk a lot about fairies, not just in Ireland and England, but in Italy and Spain, and they're always doing shapeshifting. And then, of course, there's a whole range of aquatic shapeshifters that, it's a whole different story about seals coming to shore and then shedding their skin, and out of that walks a man or a woman, and they live as human beings for as long as their skin's there, and they come back, actually literally put their skin back on and go back into the ocean. There's a lot of those kinds of stories from cultures everywhere.
Let's not even forget about supposed aliens, because there's so many shapes and sizes. They must be transferred. They transform anywhere from a human-looking alien to some little midge guy all covered with hair. And not only do the beings themselves change shape, but the damn ships morph from cigar shape to ball shape, and change in size from 2 feet round to the size of a huge mothership.
Right. And it's interesting because I talked about that in my book. I have a little section about UFOs and aliens, and I interviewed J.M. I never know his last name. I say Banias. I could be wrong, but it's Banias. And he's a pretty well-known UFOologist. That's hard to say,
It is, yeah.
But he has this interesting theory that he said, the human brain could not conceive of an alien form. So what he's saying is, in these contacts that have been recorded about, bumping up into an alien, encountering an alien, he said that what the brain will do, and we know what the brain does, it tries to compartmentalize things. So when it sees something that it is totally cannot recognize, it tries to put it in some category. Well, it's kind of human-like. Well, no, maybe it's kind of animal-like. It looks kind of like a tree, because it doesn't know what to do with that. We don't have any frame of reference. So what he's saying is that the aliens are able to sort of pick up on, let's say, our confusion. And so what they try to do, because he's saying they're trying to make contact here, what they do is they try to transform themselves into something that would be somewhat recognizable. And, you just talked about several different types of aliens, tall, short, whatever. But the fact that you can even say those words, tall, short, green, brown, silver, hair, no hair, indicates that the brain did something to recognize it as something more familiar.
There's even one that looks like the Michelin tire character.
Right. So depending maybe on where you live, with the culture you're coming from, the environment you live in, what your world views are, if you have an alien encounter, it could be very different from somebody who has one in some other continent, who has different worldviews, different environment, different belief system.
Well, it's very reminiscent of the old gods, how people would see them. I mean, you have like the Greek mythologies of Zeus coming down and taking the form of various animals to seduce women that he liked. But people don't believe in the old gods anymore. Now they believe in extraterrestrials coming out of flying saucers. So I mean, maybe the shapeshifters are the same characters. They just take on new personas as time goes by.
I think so, and that's going back to some of the old archetypes again. And you're right. In my book, I talk about the Greek culture, Egyptian culture, with the sort of shape-shifting figures in there. And yeah, Zeus. I think I counted in my book 15 different types of animals that he transformed into, including like an ant. An ant, really. And basically, as you say, to have sex with women. And it made me wonder about the women, though. I mean, they'd rather have a swan, And I didn't know where to go with that. So, trying to look that one.
Yeah. You'd never think that a swan would have a chance.
Yeah.
I guess times really have changed.
But this is sort of the old gods, and in fact, I talk about how the old gods, as technology develops and science develops, and as humanity becomes more enlightened, they put away the old gods, the Zeus and the whole pantheon and the Norse gods and all that, and they sort of take the power to themselves. They take the power to themselves in forms of not just religious clerics, but also, getting back again to it, witches, shamans, sorcerers, wizards, people with sort of arcane knowledge that are, out there and seemingly having some powers of the gods as well. If they can shapeshift, that's pretty good.
So now, when you were researching this book, I mean, I know for a fact, I mean, myself, when I work on these kinds of subjects, I mean, there's all kinds of recent stories of shapeshifters or just some kind of bizarre creatures that really do seem to be coming out of a comic book or a movie. So I mean, have you talked to anybody that you're pretty sure that they, even though maybe their interpretation wasn't quite right, that they did have some kind of unusual experience along those lines?
Right. There's been so many modern reports. There's one from Hull, England, from just 2014. So we're talking 5 years ago, in which people were seeing this. They called it like a huge dog, but they said it stood about 7 feet tall. So that's a really, really big dog, and on hind legs. And they saw this thing in a certain area around Hull. One witness said he saw the thing run and jump an 8-foot fence with no effort at all. Somebody else said they saw it leap across a 30-foot canal, an old canal of water. And they kind of recognized it, which was the interesting thing. They gave it a name. They called it Old Striker. And it turns out that Old Striker had been seen, this particular beast had been seen decades before in England as well. And people were convinced, because of what they saw, that they're looking at a werewolf. So you've got that kind of stuff going. There's a great story from South Africa that is 1987, so it's a little bit older. But it's this man who was in his house, and he heard the scratching and thumping and banging on his front door. So he grabbed an axe, just because he was, didn't know what it was. And he opened the door, and he said there was this huge bat just hanging from the rafters. So he started striking at it with the axe, and then he ran off to get help. When he came back with his little posse, he found this big, large bat dragging itself across the ground toward a fence. So while his posse stood there and watched, he whacked it again with the axe and killed it. But now here's where it gets interesting, because everybody crowds around to see what this thing was. And some people say, and this is all reported in the newspaper, South African newspaper. Some people said they saw a small donkey. Others said they saw a winged beast. But what they all agreed on, and this is really what was crazy, they all agreed that as it was laying there, that it transformed. It transformed into the shape of a human, of a child with an adult head. And then it continued to transform into a shape of an old man who they recognized as the village shaman, who said that he had powers to shapeshift. So, that's a pretty incredible story. And the man who killed the bat, child, donkey, sorcerer, went to trial. He stood trial for manslaughter. and he was convicted. The judge said that, he found it hard to believe that he could not distinguish between a man and a bat.
Wow, that's great stuff. Great stuff, and a fascinating book as well. Unfortunately, we are almost out of time, so I want to give you a chance to have you let our audience know where they can find your book, your other books, and where if you have like an online site,
Sure.
where they can find out more about you.
Absolutely. The best way is my website, which is JOHNKACHUBA.com. That's pretty easy. You can get any of my books through my website, but they're also in bookstores. And Shapeshifters is brand new, so it's been out about a month now. So you should be finding it in bookstores yet. If all that fails, all my books are on Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com. They're easy to find. If you just plug in a title on the internet, you can find them. And like I said, they're in bookstores too. And on my website, there's a blog that has a lot of metaphysical, paranormal escapades in there, as well as my schedule of appearances. I'm going to be doing a lot more about this book. I'll be in Canada later this year. I'll be in the Republic of Georgia in September, which I'm not sure many of your viewers will be there, but I'll be there.
Well, so, anyway. I hope your book shapeshifts into dollar bills or $20 bills, because I don't think dollar bills will take you to Georgia, I wouldn't say. Anyway, I want to thank you for being on this evening. Wonderful show. We covered a lot of ground, a lot of animals, a lot of strange different things. And I want to tell people, of course, to visit our YouTube channel, Mr. UFO Secret Files. And, of course, the archive here at KCOR. And thank you, Tina. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Carol, and one and all. And good night to our many listeners across the planet and perhaps somewhere else out
there. You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swarts. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swarts, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.